At this point in time, I'll invite Preeta, Rand, and Kate back to the stage for a panel conversation. I know we're slowly slipping away with time, and so I will quickly turn it over to Preeta and let you all take it from here.
Thank you so much, Jay. That was amazing. Rand and Kate, you all three of you have done such amazing work. And there are specific questions that people have about your frameworks, which I want to get to. But maybe before that, maybe, Rand all of you have talked about the kind of inside job that's required, the work of consciousness. And I'm just curious, can you just state a little bit about your story of inspiration, your moment of awakening when you felt your sense of purpose was to be part of this reset? Kate, you've talked a little bit about your founder's moment. Jay, you've talked a little bit about it within the context of your company. But I'm wondering, like, what was that moment of clarity for each of you in terms of this is how you want to devote your life, and the current systems need to be reformed?
Who's going to go first? Kate, you go first.
Absolutely, Kate.
It's a great question and always a hard one to answer briefly. But for me, basically, it was on a mountaintop when I was 18, for real. I kind of had a aha moment on a long trip in the mountains, really hard experience. Without going into the details, I was standing at this mountain pass with like wet boots, lack of food, really tired, snow, like all of that, like objectively extremely difficult and unpleasant. And I was psyched, and I was like, this is what I want to commit my life to. And I was with a group of people. So it was about place and also the like coordination with a group and that sort of leadership opportunity there. And really my career since that point has been figuring out what this is. It's about like connection to those places, connection to people in those authentic ways, doing real work, solving real problems. And, of course, there have been many, many bumps and twists and turns along the way, but really I do look back at that moment of clarity and really of that sort of understanding of the combined sort of challenge and opportunity of all those pieces coming together. And that has a lot to do with, who I am and where I am today.
Okay, Jay, you're up. I'll take us home.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. So it's interesting. So I maybe like sitting here thinking about my friends, and then also that question, Preeta, made me think about my family and my dad in particular. 20 years ago, this month, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer, and he was dead in 4 months. And during that brief time, one of the conversations that he shared with me was this. He was recollecting about his biggest regret. And my dad was not one for regrets, but his biggest regret was that he had sat out the civil rights movement. And after a life of real power and energy and action, that was what sat with him. And he tried to make it up in other ways later in life when he realized that what he'd done then, and he engaged in other ways that were really powerful. And I felt like, and so when I think about this for me is, what's the big thing going on in my lifetime that I want to make sure I'm not sitting out? And so for me, there's a combination of this individual human awakening that I know, Preeta, you are deeply engaged with, and Rand you spoke to, and the need for our systems to reflect that awakening. And for me, where I thought I could play the most interesting role would be at that intersection with our economic system. And but my moment, if I were looking at it, that would be one of the ones I would point to, would be just the very way that my dad shared that with me, not as like a gauntlet and a challenge and you must. It didn't have any of that energy. It was more in a reflective moment of real vulnerability and just real sharing about what he was thinking about when he knew that he might not be around much longer. And as someone who's also had his own battle with cancer at a very young age, I've also had to think about what that meant for me at a younger age than most. And this is where I want to be, and this is what I want to do. I want to do more good, and I want to create a system that makes it easier for others to do more good, where it doesn't have to be so heroic to swim against the current and to fight against the winds at your face. And so for me, that's what's coming up for me when you ask that really lovely question. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Jay. That's really gorgeous. Very moving.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Kate and Jay. I'm not able to recall, Preeta, a particular moment like Kate sort of had that, mountain experience. But I can tell you that I spent my high school, I started my first businesses in high school and in college. And then after college, I was running newspapers and magazines in Dallas. So I was in my 20s for about 10 years as a typical entrepreneur, not a conscious capitalist, just a capitalist. And I was training a group of my sales team one day, and something happened where there was a learning that occurred for one of my sales reps, and a learning that occurred for me. And it's reminiscent looking back on it now. In the old, I think it's a Taoist saying that the teacher and the student create the taught. That it's not like teachers are dispensing it, but the most powerful learning for me has always been when something emerges because of the two that are together. And a light came like a hero's journey, a call to adventure. And I'm like, I need to follow that. I need to follow that impulse of something that was for me incredibly almost physical, that I just started pursuing the question of how to be in a learning environment. And I've never looked back. And I ended up selling the media company and starting the business that I have now. And it's, and I don't even know if it's a choice as much as kind of following the calling itself.
Beautiful. I can tell from listening to each of you that each of you is a really authentic leader, and that manifests in the work that each of you is doing in the world. So thank you. I want to ask one more question to all of you, and then we have a number of individual questions about your different frameworks that I'll direct to one of you. So Jay, you mentioned, what is the thing that I don't want to sit out? What's happening in my lifetime that I don't want to sit out? Obviously, there's multiple things happening. There's the reform of capitalism. There's the racial justice renewed and always ongoing struggle. There's the issues of our planet, and that are dire. And I guess one of the questions that's kind of come up through the audience is, what kind of work does each of your frameworks, B Labs, 1% for the Planet, and Conscious Capitalism do to bring diversity and racial justice within your lens in your programs?
I can start again if we want to stay in that order.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great.
So, this has definitely been an area where we've continued to evolve and learn, which is great. And I would say where we are right now, we're doing a few different things. One, I mentioned sort of broadly in my remarks, is building this environmental justice framework. So we're integrating across all of our issue areas this idea of aligning your giving to support environmental justice. So if you say, I want to change or address climate change, your giving can also have an environmental justice framework around it. If you want to address water issues, whether access or, clean water or pollution, it can have that environmental justice lens. So we've built that out more clearly. We've created a definition and a sort of rubric that we can use to assess nonprofits that we bring on. And what that's enabled us to do is bring on more different nonprofits than we were prior, because we've essentially expanded the definition of what environmental giving is by adding this environmental justice space and acknowledgement. So that's been a great change for us, because what that has done is sort of rippled through change in a bunch of different ways. One is it's changed the way we're driving impact. So, it's diversified the impact by increasing the, essentially the sort of footprint of where that impact can happen, because it's not just the sort of traditional environmental definition, but it's broader to encompass that environmental justice definition. It's broadened the nonprofits who are part of our network, so there's more diversity of nonprofits. It's also created a lot of learning and diversity across our member giving network, and our staff has really been doing a great job of sort of focusing on how do we advise to either follow companies who are saying, hey, this is a priority for us, we want to give to support environmental justice issues, or to educate, like, hey, if you're thinking about climate change, might we suggest, adding this nonprofit to your organization that also focuses on environmental justice? So, we've expanded there. And we are tracking that. So we've built it into our metrics in our strategic plan. It's one of our key initiatives. So we're really building it in to make sure that that happens. And then on the more straight up kind of diversity side, we've made internal changes in terms of how we do our hiring and how we, build our team, remote and in office. So we're explicitly focusing on, diversity, as well as the, those broader sort of lenses around sort of equity and inclusion across our impact and our operations. So maybe I'll stop there, but it's been a great expansion for our team to really build out and put structure around that work.
Great. Thank you for your leadership on that.
And I do want to go last on this one, Jay, so why don't you go next?
Happily. Kate, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the question. The B Lab is several years into a journey that it knows is a lifetime journey of continuous learning. And so I'll share a bunch of stuff, and all under the headline of we're learning and we're making tons of mistakes and learning as we go. And of course, I'm not in a day-to-day operating role at B Lab anymore. So I'm channeling and speaking on their behalf, given the nature of the question, but also Imperative 21 is also going on its own journey from a network perspective. But at B Lab, there's we're thinking about systems and power. And from a systems standpoint, the work that we're doing with the Benefit Corp legislation is an attempt to shift power. 92.7% of all the wealth that's held in the US in the form of stocks are held by white households. So we can diversify the heck out of corporate leadership and boards. And if they're really successful, they'll be creating more wealth for white people and exacerbating the current racial wealth gap. And so the system itself of moving from shareholder primacy to stakeholder governance is part of a shift has a racial equity and racial justice element to it. Of course, that's at a broad systemic level. And then of course, with the impact management tools that B Lab, not just 4,000 B Corps using, but there are 125,000 companies around the world that are using those impact management tools, and they have tangible, concrete metrics and performance indicators and case studies and tools and resources to help people increase, advance their company towards racial justice, right? Towards building racial equity, whether that's in board or leadership or hiring or supply chain or product design or community engagement or et cetera, or thinking about environmental work through a climate justice lens. All those things are embedded in the systems and the management systems that B Lab creates, and are there not just for B Lab, but they're there for 100,000 companies to then use. So that's like B Lab's core work. That being said, B Lab's board is shifting, right? Because that's where power resides. B Lab's executive leadership is shifting. I mentioned I'm no longer there. I'm an old white dude, right? And so creating space for a new generation of leadership. The same thing is happening at B Lab Global. Also our management team and investments in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of new staff and team to be leaders of our justice, equity, diversity, inclusion efforts, both internally for the 100 and some odd staff members within our B Lab network, and then also externally to engage with our community of almost 2,000 B Corps here in the US, specifically through that lens. which means that we're reevaluating all of our process. How do our current processes reinforce dominant culture behaviors of white supremacy culture or patriarchy or other things about urgency and perfectionism, and either or all these things that are embedded in how we do what we do, not just what we do, is really interrogating that pretty deeply. Employee resource groups and white affinity spaces and multiracial affinity spaces and programs for BIPOC team members and BIPOC community members, and making sure we adjust our pricing and our programs to make sure that this is an attractive community for people of color-led businesses, for Black-led businesses to be a part of. So there's all kinds of deep structural stuff that we're doing that's all a work in process. And I'd say the most important thing that we're bringing into it, in addition to the sort of learner's mentality that Rand talked about, is the recognition that we're going to screw up, and just to let go of the fear of doing the wrong thing, and embrace the stamina and the to say, nope, we're going to do the wrong thing, and we're going to own it, and we're going to learn from it, and we're going to do better tomorrow than we did yesterday. And I think that's the thing I'm most excited to be be a part of a community of learning and practice on this, Preeta, because it's hard work, and it's work that's better done with others than alone.
Yeah. I love the way, by the way, that you referenced the subtractive solution, which is, you said, getting out of the way and letting a new generation of leaders and a different face of leadership rise.
You actually gave me a great phrase at one point, Preeta, in a very loving way, was you said, Jay, you've got to start thinking about being a ladder, not a leader. And so I really appreciated that. And the way in which you shared that with me made me feel like, oh, she trusts me enough to call me in, to say, hey, how you're showing up might be in an old model, and you need to think about yourself and what your role is in a different way. And I think if we can together model that, where I'm able to receive that and then show up differently and not be defensive about it, then that's like one step forward. So I just want to appreciate you for your role in helping me see things differently. So thanks.
Back at you. Rand.
Yeah, well, I wanted to go last because I actually think that conscious capitalism is behind in the journey that Kate and Jay have described it for their organizations. And I'm not saying this critically. We, as a nonprofit, have taken this topic of diversity, inclusion, and equity and equality very seriously. We've had lots of international board conversations and subcommittees. And just in the fall of last year, Magat Wade, who's on our international board, she's from Senegal. She represents a really fascinating and at times, important and provocative point of view globally on this topic, because I think we've been very at least I've been very US centric on it. And she's like, look at it from a global perspective, especially from an African perspective. And I've been very fortunate to have been selected along with Magat to co-chair our new committee on diversity and inclusion. And so rather than try to tell you guys what we've done or what we have presented as part of our platform, I would say that we're beginning the journey. And I'll step away from conscious capitalism and just give you an aspiration that I have as a contributor to the conversation and Jay, the learning. And I'm going to just frame it up like this. There are, at least in my sense of change, and I spent a lot of time trying to understand change and status quo, there are only two reasons that a person or an organization or a system, in my experience, changes. Either they are forced out of their status quo or they choose out. So in the absence of being forced out of something or choosing out of something, the status quo is pretty intoxicating. And so I aspire for conscious capitalism that we can enroll our members, a lot of CEOs, not just in the United States, but around the world in our chapters, is to find a way to enroll CEOs to be choosing out. Because as Jay knows, the distinctions that I think Imperative 21 is really tuned in on is there's technical change and there's adaptive change. And a technical change you can outsource. I talked about that earlier. And an adaptive change, this is sometimes called a wicket problem. And an adaptive change, one of the things that I've always appreciated about this definition is it requires the people who have the problem to participate in the solution. And as a conscious capitalist and as part of the conscious capitalism community, we are, representative of the people who are in charge, and there is a power dynamic there. So how do we find ways, this is a question I'm asking myself, to engage the people with the problem, both those that are activists on the outside of the power system and those that are in control of the power system itself? How do we engage both of those stakeholders and others to actually choose a different path forward, which the Imperative 21 vision is a powerful direction for that, along with Kate's vision, along with B Corp. And so that I'll end with the idea that is really hard, because those in power and those that want to disrupt power typically are going to see the pathologies in each other, the shadows in each other. And how do we actually use that idea of higher ground to really move towards an integration of what's best from both of those dimensions? And that's all I can say is vision for me personally, and to be continued on Conscious Capitalism's official position on this that hopefully we'll be revealing this year. Great.
Thanks. I'm going to now turn to some questions about your frameworks. So this is Jay, probably more directed to you. Graham explained some of this at the outset, but maybe you can also clarify the difference between being a benefit corporation and a certified B Corp. I know you get that all the time.
Yeah, no, I was laughing because I was like, oh man, Graham nailed it. I don't have to do it. I'm so excited. So it's a great question, and it's super confusing. The benefit corporation is a legal structure, right? So you could call your attorney and he could talk to you about it, or she could talk to you about it. And so if you're going to incorporate any company, you can incorporate as a regular corporation, or you could incorporate as a benefit corporation in pretty much in whatever 80% of the states in the U.S. Currently. And that new structure operates exactly the same as a traditional corporation, except for basically one thing, which is the fiduciary duties of the directors are no longer narrowly articulated as defined as the best interest of the shareholders. They are now more broadly, expansively conceived as considering the best interest of all your stakeholders. Right? That's basically the thing. And the difference is it's no longer just permissible to consider stakeholders, it's actually required. And so and Preeta, you know this, like in the law, the difference between may and shall is a huge difference, because just telling somebody that you may consider folks also means you may not, for a lot of reasons, like you don't want to, or it's a tough year, or whatever it is. But shall means you're going to be held accountable for that. And it means if I'm a board member, I now have a fiduciary duty to care about that. So when we're evaluating a new plant or a new product line or a new marketplace or an acquisition or a sale opportunity, I have to think about that, not only in terms of how this is going to play out in shareholder value. I have to think about how that decision is going to impact my workers, my supply chain, my community, and future generations through our environment, which is that one word shift is a pretty big shift. So that's what the benefit corporation is. For the certification, all certified B corporations have to meet that legal requirement, right? Have to adopt that kind of stakeholder governance. And on top of that, they have to actually have demonstrated, verified standards of performance about whether they've actually created that value. Just because they're legally obligated to doesn't mean they did or didn't. It's a statement of intention and accountability, but at the end of the day, it's the US, we like to pay for performance, right? We like to focus on what people actually did. And so the certification is basically looking at what actually companies did through a rigorous third-party verification process. And so those 4,000 companies have both adopted that legal structure, or the equivalent for LLCs, and they've been verified as having reached a high level of performance for worker value, community impact, environmental stewardship. That's basically the difference.
Okay, great. So Rand, what is the I'm going to add to the question. The question that the audience has asked is, what does it take to change the short-term profitability mindset to long-term sustainability? So the mindset shift question, but I'm going to add to that also. How does conscious capitalism, what is conscious capitalism as a framework or as a label? What does it mean for a business? What do they have to do, or is it more of an intention?
I would say that it starts with the consciousness of the leader. So I'd say it starts with an intention. And we've been struggling, as Alexander could tell you as our CEO, we've been struggling for over a decade with, well, can we get a certification? Can we do an assessment? And it's been one of the wonderful reasons that the work that Jay's been doing with B Corp and benefit corporations is such a great companion for conscious capitalism, because we can measure over here on Jay's side and on the conscious leadership side and on the purpose side and the orientation side is what Jay would call years ago with me intention, right? And so I think we celebrate that, and it's really difficult when we have a CEO summit. And I used to chair the CEO summit, and years ago I had several calls like this, which was just mind blowing. CEOs of Fortune 500 companies that I have some personal, we have shared personal friendships with, and they would call me and say, Rand, I read that, Raj Sisodia and John Mackey's book, Conscious Capitalism, love it. Want that, CEO. And this happened multiple times. And I'd really like to know, what can we do to become a conscious capitalism business? Can I send my HR people? What can I do? And I'm like, you need to become a more conscious human being. And they're like, well, what is that? These are open, kind of curious people. And I remember talking to one of them and I said, well, why don't you start with a 2-day conference with 250 CEOs at our CEO Summit, Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit. It was a man. He goes, oh, Rand, I don't have time to do 2 days at a conference. Can I send my head of HR? And I said to him, did you just say, can I send the head of HR to the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit? And he's like, yeah, I don't have time. And Preeta, I think this is our biggest dilemma in conscious capitalism. And I think it's our biggest dilemma in short-termism at a systemic level, is that the people who are in the positions of the highest power and influence are the people who are the least likely to change, because they're the people who have the most to lose, and they don't have a psychology of doing their own work. What they have a psychology of is delegating and outsourcing almost everything, which is how you become a powerful CEO in America. You delegate and you outsource, but you can't delegate or outsource your own inner work. And I'll end with this. One of my partners, Wes Blair, said in front of a group that we were having the same conversation, and they were wanting us to do their work. And he looked at them and he said, guys and gals, right? It was a mixed group. You aren't going to get any stronger watching me do push-ups. And it was like, yeah, that's the move. Like, so I'd say that's a little, I've answered multiple questions in there, but a little essence.
Great. So we have, I think, about maybe 7 or 8 minutes left. Kate, a question comes up about the criteria you used, your organization uses for vetting your nonprofits. And how does that compare to, for example, GiveWell's criteria? That's the specific question, but I want to go a little broader than that and ask you, how do you measure success of your efforts and the efforts of your nonprofits to which you direct the funding?
Those are all great questions. In terms of how we vet our nonprofits, fundamentally it's a knowledge-based model, and we definitely have people, including sometimes ourselves, who want us to boil it down into like one super simple rubric and everyone should get this score and then it works. But we keep coming back to, nope, that actually doesn't work, because really the way that we drive impact and the way we elevate the most effective nonprofits is having an understanding of effective giving partnerships, which are going to, there's a, if I were to understand Jay's, giving goals and values, we could sort of zero in on a couple of best fit nonprofits for Jay that would meet his goals and values. If I were to do the same thing for Rand and for you, Preeta, we could find best fit for nonprofits for each of you, and they would look different. they would be different because you have different goals and values, and you're looking for different impacts as a result of your giving. It's all still credible giving. It's all still driving impact for the planet, but there's no one size fits all. So we, using that as a kind of overall framework, we have basic criteria which have to do with, IRS status, or in other countries, other forms of, formal status of nonprofit, of being a nonprofit entity. And then we also have some sort of, checks on mission focused on environment. And as I'd mentioned earlier, with that expanded understanding of environmental justice. And we also have a very detailed questionnaire that we try to have every nonprofit complete. And certainly those that we recommend, they all are completing it, that really articulate, how do you drive impact? What are your metrics? How do you report that? How do you partner? Because that's one of the really important things for us, is that relationship between the member donor and the nonprofit recipient, because we really want to kind of equalize the power in that. The member is giving the money and the resources, but the nonprofit is driving the impact on the ground. And so really creating that partnership is really critical. And that's where, we differ from, say, a GiveWell or a Charity Navigator or things like that, which we definitely look at. We love to sort of be able to see, like, how is this nonprofit working in those spaces? But, sometimes for a really excellent nonprofit, grassroots nonprofit that's creating an innovative solution in a place where there is no market and where there hasn't been nonprofit attention before, they may not score very high on a Charity Navigator or a GiveWell or something like that. But that's because they haven't been around for long enough. That doesn't mean that they're not able to do effective work. Giving to them won't drive change. So we really try to go that extra step to provide that added value and understanding of, what's the member looking for, what's the nonprofit looking to accomplish, and how do we create those best fit partnerships with a really clear understanding of, all of the characteristics of that nonprofit. So just briefly with that, knowing that time is almost up, our primary metric of how we measure our impact is our giving number, the total amount of giving done by our network. So we track that, and it's one big number, and then we break it down through storytelling into all of the sort of how that shows up on the ground. So acres, trees, people, there's so many, literally thousands of ways in which that story shapes out. But just very briefly, that's our impact measurement.
Great. So I'm going to ask each of you, maybe a minute and a half or so each, if you could just maybe give some advice to young people entering the business world who want to do more good, partly through business, or maybe you can just give advice to your younger self, or some words of wisdom. I don't want to say advice. Advice is a strong word, but some thoughts and nuggets to, if you were approaching this world now with the frameworks that are now in place, how might you think about how to go about both using the frameworks and developing the inner resources and the inner work to be able to use those frameworks well?
I'll jump in, and I'll share something. So it's a combination of speaking to my younger self, which I happen to be able to do sometimes when I get to talk to my kids, and one of the things I see in them, which makes me nervous, is seeing something in them that I know exists in me in a really problematic way, challenging way, and that I see in different forms when I'm speaking to young people, high school, college, grad students, and young professionals, so 20-something professionals, which I've had the luxury and the pleasure of being able to do. I teach a high school class. I do a lot of college lecturing, and obviously have employed a lot of 20-somethings over the last 25 years or so. And one of the biggest common things is none of them feel like they're enough. They're doing enough. And there is an incredible amount of self-imposed pressure and unwellness that shows up. And in me, I believe that showed up in, I believe a narrative that says that that's one of the reasons why I got cancer at 49 years old. And so, or that I create a very high pressured, urgent scaling energy in the enterprises I'm involved with that can have really big wakes when you do it. And so if I were specifically speaking to a younger me or younger professionals, younger folks, is just to know that don't diminish your passion in any way, and don't limit your imagination and what you can do, or be limited by anything that exists. Do the work, as Rand said, like show up and do the work, and then you've got to let go. And you've got to know that the systems of inequity and injustice that you're fighting against, et cetera, they're hundreds of years old. And it's going to take time. And as amazing as you are, as talented as you are, you're going to make your little dent, but you're not going to see the end of the road. And you need to like make peace with that, and to not put so much pressure on yourself that you eat yourself up from the inside out. Because you'll not only harm yourself, but you're going to harm others in the way. And so it would be like, you are enough in what you're doing, is what I tell myself, and what I wish for my kids, and what I wish for everybody else's kids, is to know that they need to do the work, and then they need to know that what they're doing is enough.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate the themes that that Jay shared, and in many ways similar to what I would have said independently. I really feel like two things kind of show up for me listening to that reflection, beautiful reflection, Jay. Number one is time and time horizon. So when I'm talking to young people, especially young professionals, I try to invite them into this possibility that there's this sort of infinite time that has existed, Jay, beyond hundreds of years, thousands of years, millions of years, billions of years. That this thing that's going on, that we're a small part of, a very small part of, has been happening for a long time, and that we have the opportunity to make a contribution while we're here. And how can we not take ourselves too seriously while we're searching to find that? And I really love, Jay, the caution of don't get overly wrapped around the axle. Be my, this contraction around I'm not good enough, I'm not creating enough results, I'm not putting enough points on the board. But to really, I'd probably give him James Carse's book, Preeta, Finite and Infinite Games, and I think it's the best book that I've read on time ever. And this idea that there are finite games and there are infinite games, and each of them only has one objective. A finite game's objective is to win the game. A infinite game's objective is to ensure the game continues, right? So it's like, wow, we can play finite games with my kids. My 13-year-old loves to play chess. Let's play chess. Let's be passionate about it, but let's realize that that's not the game, the ultimate game, right? The ultimate game is to be a player in the infinite game. And an infinite player can play many finite games, but a finite player can't play the infinite game. So that would be my counsel, is learn how to play both games really well.
Wow. Kate.
Yeah, so you guys are hard acts to follow. But I'd say like 5 kind of were mantras to live by for me, that I would certainly share with my younger self and like offer up to any of us out there at any age, really. So one is progress, not perfection. It can be so easy to get stalled, sort of overthinking or trying to get everything right, and just making progress every day and sticking with that, and welcoming that in others is a very valuable thing. So progress, not perfection. Fall in love. I really believe that we fight for, we stick with, we get great joy from just really opening ourselves up to love. I mean, I love my staff, and I tell them that, and I value that, and that's part of how I lead. I love this world that we live in. I love so many things, and that informs how I lead, how I show up. And I think opening ourselves up to that has a lot of power. Even as I say that, I can feel like my heart opens up when I say those words. And that makes me able to engage in the world differently. So I really feel like opening ourselves up to falling in love in the broadest sense has real power. This one will sound more true to my job, but everyone has a 1%. And I really believe that literally and figuratively, and sort of having that in your head can be really helpful, because it, helps you to break it down. Like, what's the 1% I can do today? It sort of aligns with that progress, not perfection. But 1% every day adds up to a lot. 1% every day with everyone else around you doing their 1% adds up to a whole lot. So really stepping into that. Do one thing every day that scares you. That's an Eleanor Roosevelt quote that I definitely hold dear. And, there's a lot of little conversations that are scary, or big decisions that are scary, or new habits that are scary. Just like do one every day and acknowledge that it's a scary thing and that it's going to help you to grow. And then the last one is one that my dad, who's 85, shared with me. I had to do a graduation speech, and I was like, what the heck am I going to say at a graduation speech? What do I know? And I asked him, and he shared a few things with me. And then in classic fashion for my dad, he slept on it, and he called me back the next day and he said, you know what I'd really say is that the journey continues. And he's 85, and he's had, a great life and a hard life and all of the ups and downs of a life. And the journey continues. And I think that's just really powerful to remember, because we can feel this urgency sometimes, and that's good. We need to feel that. And we also need to know that the journey, the learning continues. So that's what I'd share.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. I'm just going to close with a quote from Howard Thurman, who was the spiritual mentor to Martin Luther King Jr. When we think about whether we're doing enough, don't ask what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that, because what the world needs is more people who've come alive. And when we think about what all of this is about, the enlivening people and planet. And so, coming alive ourselves is the first step, and everything goes from that. So with that, thanks for an amazing conversation.
Oh, so amazing. I mean, the depth and the heart and the soul. I'm on fire right now with this conversation, and I so deeply am grateful for each of you for taking the time to participate in this, especially this enlightening and engaging conversation after your presentation, which is my favorite event of the conference already. It's going to be hard to top it.